FitLife Brands was fighting one of those perfect storm type of quarterly scenarios that they wouldn't have survived just a few short years ago. Why are things different now? So it starts out casually. You land a large customer, those products get on shelf, they begin to start selling pretty well. That customer is extremely happy, they ask for more. You pop the champagne, you're excited. All of a sudden, that customer is 30% of your revenue, 50% of your revenue, 70% of your revenue. But you can't say no. This customer has proven to be an amazing thing for your brand. They pay on time. They're constantly asking for you to fill in more gaps on their shelf. But what you don't realize is essentially your company is pegged to the performance of another company. It's not necessarily even pegged to your own performance anymore. And when your company becomes dependent on one single customer, all it takes is one decision to create a major disaster. This is what happened to FitLife Brands, the owner of a collection of sports nutrition and nutritional supplement brands that are sold mostly through GNC franchises. If you look at a percentage of business that GNC makes up of FitLife Brands over the last couple of years, fiscal 2018, GNC made up 77% of their business. Last year in fiscal 19, that went down a little bit to 75% of FitLife Brands revenue coming from GNC. And also FitLife Brands is not only kind of overexposed to one particular customer, but it's also overexposed to one product category. And that might seem a little bit confusing to people because you think, hey, we're supposed to be focusing on a niche. But as a company grows and as a portfolio grows, which FitLife Brands is a portfolio of companies, they should be thinking about diversifying their business away from being extremely overexposed to one customer, one sales channel, and one particular product category. So what's this solution to the overexposure? And it's diversify, diversify, diversify. And I have not done a piece of content around FitLife Brands since May of 2018. So it's been a little bit of time. So I want to give you guys a little bit of context around just the size of business of FitLife Brands. Fiscal year 2016, they did revenue of $25.3 million. Fiscal 2017, they did $17.8 million. Fiscal 18, they did $17.1 million. And then last year, fiscal 2019, actually rebounded their sales and had top line revenue of $19.5 million. So as I stated above, the majority of the revenue from FitLife Brands does come from GNC, both the domestic and international franchise locations. But just to give you guys a little bit of sense around like their overall channel mix, you had in fiscal 2018, 77% coming from GNC, 18% coming from other channels, and 5% coming from digital. In 2019, 75% of their sales came from GNC, 13% came from others, so a little bit down there, and then digital made up 12% of their business, so a pretty good gain in that area. Just to give you a little bit of understanding maybe around what happened in that other sales category, the Isotory brand that they merged with in 2015, they've struggled recently, and the sales of that brand is a lot more diversified into some other specialty channels, into drugstores and mass locations. I think total they are in somewhere around like 25,000 locations the Isotory brand is in. Since they just reported their quarterly earnings for quarter 2, I do want to give you guys a little bit of numbers around FitLife Brands. This is going to be utilized to tell a bigger story about kind of how they're changing their business and how they still have a long way to go and they have some rough seas ahead. The revenue for 2020 quarter 2 was only $2.7 million. So this was down 40.7% year over year and also down sequentially quarter over quarter of 55%. So they had a pretty strong first quarter Second quarter, not all that great. What was happening in second quarter, if you guys have watched a lot of my earnings breakdown videos, you kind of know the environment that was happening across CPG. There was pretty much a perfect storm that was happening for FitLife Brands in this quarter. COVID-19 overall creating a lot of issues with just gyms closing, mobility, and that caused a lot of issues with the sports nutrition category as a whole. And being that FitLife Brands, a lot of their sales are sports nutrition products, caused a lot of issues there. Also, COVID-19 from the mobility side did cause a lot of people not to go into store locations. So regardless if it was Isotory or if it was like the core FitLife Brands, they were not going into physical locations. So that caused some pressure on their overall sales. Now, most of their sales coming from GNC, there was some things happening with them as well. Obviously, the mobility issues and people not going into the store of GNC caused issues. I think the franchise locations had 17.6% down same-store comps on a year-over-year basis. So their business was down substantially, which definitely caused some issues from sales there. And then also because there was a impending bankruptcy that ultimately became a reality at the end of quarter two in June for GNC, a lot of the brands overall were trying to really manage their accounts receivable with GNC. They were short shipping, maybe they were holding back shipments just because they didn't want to get into this scenario where they were putting out a bunch of product towards GNC and they did not know when that bankruptcy was going to happen. There's a lot of kind of bankruptcy rules in terms of how you can structure your receivables, in terms of how you are listed in terms of creditors. So a lot of these brands were trying to hold back and be conservative. That obviously hurt the revenue for FitLife Brands. So the question is, as a small business, as a publicly traded company, like how did FitLife Brands get through this kind of hellish quarter? It goes back to this idea of like diversification and talking about needing to diversify. What FitLife Brands did was they've been, over the last probably year and a half, they've been focusing on making digital improvement, focusing more on the digital channel overall. So by focusing on this and focusing on a channel that's higher gross margins, has a quicker cash conversion cycle than a wholesale business like GNC, they were able to increase their gross margins 800 basis points or 8%, which is humongous. Talking about digital sales, in the quarter two of 2020, they had their first $1 million quarter for digital sales. That was actually up 87% year over year. Just to give you guys a little bit of context, all of 2018, they did $850,000 in digital sales. Last year, they did $2.34 million in sales. And then just in the first 6 months of 2020, they've already done just around $2 million in digital sales. So they have been making a good amount of progress. And if you look at the first half of sales of that channel mix that I talked about earlier, you still have a good amount of reliance, unfortunately, still on GNC at 67% of their business. Digital has grown to 22% of their business, and 11% is coming from the other channel. So is this ideal? No. Are they actually making strides, and do they have a little bit more runway because of the type of GNC business they do to continue to make changes? I think yes, because the majority of the GNC locations that are closing, or at least were announced to be closed, did come from the corporate-owned side. FitLife Brands revenue comes from the franchise side. And though there's some franchises that are closing, unfortunately, the majority of them are closing on the corporate side. So the assumption of FitLife Brands, and a lot of this probably comes down to GNC, some of their earlier reporting, is that because some of the corporate-owned locations will be closing and still leaving some of these franchise locations close enough to those closed corporate locations, they're going to be getting some more benefit towards those franchise locations. And being that FitLife Brands is merchandised in these franchise locations, they think they're going to get an uplift in those locations. The metric that I'm mentioning around GNC is that I think they said somewhere around 60% of the sales of closed locations are getting recaptured by other GNC locations. FitLife believes that the franchise portfolio will actually have a more positive operating landscape because of all the corporate locations that are going to be closed. FitLife Brands also kind of went a little bit further and looked at some quarter three numbers up to August 12th, so almost 50% of the quarter, they kind of are giving you a little bit of insight of what's happening around their business. They said revenue in July of 2020 was among the best months in the company's history. Up to August 12th, the revenue for quarter three on a preliminary number is $3.7 million. So already passed what they did last quarter in that kind of bad quarter. So that's up 64% year over year. They are noting that a lot of that kind of growth was because of the GNC franchise locations restocking their shelves after the announced bankruptcy, and FitLife Brands kind of knew what was happening. They were able to kind of restock some of their shelves. So that is spiking the sales a little bit, but they are still seeing low single-digit growth on a year-over-year basis in the GNC franchise business. On the digital business, they're saying that's continuing to be somewhere around 100% year-over-year growth. So on some final thoughts here, like where does the company go? And I think I'm going to echo a lot of those May 2018 article thoughts. And I'm going to be putting the Medium article link down below if you guys want to read that article from May 2018. Reiteration that building the brand off the back of a retailer, specifically a physical retailer, is definitely playing with fire. I do like that over the last 2 or so years, FitLife Brands has realized that and has tried to replace their sales not with another physical retailer, but actually owning their distribution point and doing it through digital sales. That being said, I don't want FitLife Brands to think or be overconfident that they are a great digital business. I don't think they're that. Unfortunately, I have to be pretty honest on that point. They are still a very transactional brand. And because they're a transactional brand, they're going to be struggling digitally to not fall into that kind of pricing game, race to the bottom that happens with the commodification of an ultra competitive category. A lot of the growth that's happening right now is because in the United States, mobility is down overall. People are shopping more online. And if somebody's used to going into a GNC location to buy your specific product, now they're just going to go online to buy that initially. Now, what happens when everything goes back to some semblance of a normal, physical sales go back? Is digital sales going to be just as impressive from a growth perspective? That's kind of where I think there's going to be some struggle because they're not putting in the time and effort to actually build a brand experience and build that customer relationship. They're actually just providing a one-to-one type of a transactional equivalency that they do in the physical retail sense through GNC franchises. So my advice for FitLife Brands is probably still to do what I said before, is that honestly, go out, raise some capital, look at some debt instruments. They have a pretty clean balance sheet at this point, or maybe do some type of a stock deal and make it with the intent of acquiring a digital savvy brand that has a strong entrepreneurial leadership team or some type of digital benefits. Maybe that's going out and acquiring maybe some digital talent with a small agency. Could be non-brand related. I do like the idea of acquiring a brand because they already know the space pretty well, and those entrepreneurial leadership team can help them reimagine the current product portfolio and also look at launching new products that could help them diversify outside of just the sports supplement market. I believe that FitLife Brands has some really good operators, especially their CEO comes from really good lineage in terms of him understanding how to operate the business. The problem is that they lack forward-looking visionaries that's going to get their business to 50 million, 100 million, 250, $500 million in the next 3 to 5 years. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to help support me, make sure you guys hit that thumbs up button on this video. If this is the first time you've been introduced to my videos, would love for you guys to be a part of my community by subscribing to my channel. I upload several videos just like this weekly. And if you guys want to connect further outside of this platform, I do include all of my social media links down below. I just want to thank you guys again for your time. Hopefully I gave you some value in return, and we'll see you guys on the next video.